Welcome to the Core Women Podcast, the place for women entrepreneurs, authors, and self-starters looking to build community and gain valuable insights through expert interviews with women at the top of their game. Join your host, podcaster, producer, expert coach, entrepreneur, and author, Dr. Summer Watson, as she aims to inspire and empower you through these candid conversations. Lean in and embrace the journey. It's time to start the show. Here's your host, Dr. Summer Watson.
Welcome to another episode of Core Women, where personal stories meet professional transformation. Today's guest, Liat Siegel, is a mother of six, a strategic designer, and the founder of Hadar Interiors. But her path hasn't been easy. After the devastating loss of her son mid-pregnancy, Liat's world turned upside down. What followed was a deeply emotional and courageous journey, one that reshaped her business, her creative voice, and her purpose. This episode is about resilience, reinvention, and how design can hold space for healing. Let's dive right into this and welcome Liat.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. I cannot wait to get into your story. But before we dive into that professional journey, if you could describe your journey in one word to this point, what would that be and why?
Can I say two? Overcoming adversity?
Of course. Of course. Tell us more.
I think that to have a family, to run a business, and to meet all the challenges in life, it's all about overcoming adversity and not giving up, becoming stronger, more resilient. And even if you're kicking and screaming along the entire way, the entire journey, it's really about continuing forward for your family, for your loved ones, and being a light, an inspiration to those around you.
You know, I love that, Liat. But let me ask you a question. When you're in that struggle or in that time of your life where you're confronting something difficult, how are you taking care of yourself while also being that inspiration?
I think when running a business, it's not an easy thing, and I think we often forget, and I think we should hold space for that forgetting, like to be easy on ourselves. We have a culture now where I think we're saying, oh, you have to take care of yourself, you have to take care of yourself. And then when we don't and we forget to, then we're hard on ourselves. The whole point is really to not be hard on ourselves, where we forget to take care of ourselves. But then when we do forget to take care of ourselves, to say it's okay, I'm going to regroup and I'm going to realign. And a lot of that realignment, you know, we have seasons where sometimes it's just hustle and grind. And then we have moments where we recognize, okay, wait, I need to slow down. And as long as we're moving and inching towards more of that, I think that we're in a good path. And especially for my kids, I try to teach them that there's no perfection, even in taking care of myself, that we have to constantly regroup, realign, and that is the inspiration for them to be in the imperfection.
It's interesting because a lot of people, I think, when we're in those types of situations where they are stressful, they are trying, it's pushing us way beyond our comfort zone. And then, of course, as you said, we can be hard on ourselves. So how do we show ourselves some grace? And how do you show yourself grace?
I've been really more intentional about going for walks and being in nature. We moved to a place where I can do that. Before we were more in the city. And so pausing to read, to walk, to go on dates with my husband, to take time with my kids, and to really try to be more present rather than just being in the hustle and the grind.
I love that. Well, can you take us back to the beginning of your journey in design? Let's talk a little bit about your design journey. What first drew you to this world, and how did you build Hadar Interiors?
It really goes back to how I dealt with struggle and emotion as a child. My parents got separated and went through a very difficult divorce. And it was my way of finding healing through that challenge. And it was my solace. I would move around furniture. My parents would come home and, everything would be rearranged. And I just found it as a way, aside for playing guitar and art and journaling, it was another tool for me. And so eventually, as I grew older, I found more passion in that I with fabrics and materials and just color. And I was always constantly trying to create that, to recreate that safe haven for myself. And then I wanted to do that for others. I was always, saying like, can I rearrange your room for you? Can I?
Wow.
And I would go into a room and I would just rearrange it in my head. And I do that now too, but then unrealized, it was untapped. And so I went to school for design, and my husband and I got married halfway into college. So he, along the 17 years since I've been doing design, has been learning alongside me. And we kind of started the business together. And as we had kids, I eventually, at one point, decided 10 years ago that I would do it full time and that this would be my my path in life.
Terrific. Okay. So you've described your work as initially being ROI focused and business driven. What did that look like before a loss, your loss?
So we had actually two losses before that, and that is actually when the ROI was birthed. And it was those first two losses that I didn't want to do anything. I became numb, and because I had been working and giving everything to everyone else and not taking care of myself. And after having paused everything, stopped and said, reevaluated, and literally said, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I want to just be a mother. I just want to be with my kids. They are my whole reason and my purpose. And there's nothing else in the world that matters more. And so, having lost those two first pregnancies, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then it took several months for me to then just walk into my office and fast forward. And I'm like, I'm here in my early 30s, finding myself rearranging my office the way I used to rearrange it as a little girl. Not the office, but my bedroom or my spaces. And that was cathartic for me. That was my healing. And only once I started rearranging it, I started feeling like these little sparks of inspiration, these little sparks of knocking at the door, like saying, this is your calling. This is not just a business. This is your soul journey. This is your expression of yourself, the very essence of yourself. And that brought me to realize that design is not just aesthetics, it's how our environment uplifts our souls. And that moment in time taught me that there is a return on investment, not just financially, because we know that when we feel good, we do good. At that, when customers visit our, whether it's a hotel or a restaurant or employees in a space, when they feel good, they want to be there and they want to come back. But it's also the ROI of the emotions and the uplifting and being human centric that is so powerful about this kind of design. And at that point in time, we created the road method, return on an emotional design or environmental design. So we started systemizing our approach so that we can recreate that emotion in every space that we create.
That is so special. It's hard to go through those losses. And yet, through both those losses, you've evolved, you've recreated, you've done some introspection, you've become more human centric, as you said, in your delivery of services and products. And to me, that is so fulfilling for you as well as I'm sure for the consumer. I lived in Japan for 3 years. I lived on a little island off of mainland Japan called Okinawa, Japan. And periodically I would go over to mainland Japan and go to Kyoto. And that was a place where it was so centering and so healing, where I could just get away and just walk philosopher's path. I could go and look at the temples. I can go take in culture and just be in my presence and be present in that. And so it sounds like as you evolved and as you changed, you were able to do a lot of that and then give back to your community in that same way where they could be present in the spaces that they wanted to recreate for themselves. So I love how, although it's loss and change, you were able to offer something very unique and different to your clients as well through all of that. And my next question is, because you know, as well as others out there who are probably listening, healing isn't linear. It isn't just a straight line. What were some of the practices or moments that helped you begin reconnecting with yourself and that creative spark to create something like the road method?
So I think it goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning, that it's not linear. It's always trial and error, being in imperfect action. Because fast forward when we had our third loss at a much later point, where this was a child that I held and I kissed and I named. At that point, giving to myself and finding the strength, and after having that third loss, those practices had to become much more intentional. I had to do a lot of experimentation. And something as devastating as losing a child at any point, whether it's in pregnancy or after birth or later on in life, grief is grief. And so now at that point, you have to find new ways of healing and new ways of coping. And so I think that I'm still on that journey of finding practices. And a lot of that is more introspection. And it's going back to what worked before and then taking it a step further. Meditation is a huge, huge aspect of healing for me. And then also creating the environment for meditation, a calm, quiet, beautiful space that can ultimately provide healing. I used to believe that space is the healing, but I now know that it facilitates the healing. And that is the main difference and depth in which we practice design.
It sounds like that space that you create is really a conduit to help support that healing, that creative safe space to really help that healing evolve. And look at somebody like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and what she created in regards to loss and grief and the cycle of loss and grief. She says also it's not linear. There might be 6 stages. However, you might revisit those other stages, but it's how you're responding versus reacting within those stages that really helps. And we each have our own way of coping. Our coping mechanisms look different. Your ability to recreate spaces to create that safety, that catharsis, that healing is so important. It's so unique. And so, how would you say that you help not just with healing, not just with grief, but how are you, when you first start working with a client, how do you help them at Hadar Designs? How do you help your client with their first steps in recognizing what their space might need or how they can recreate that space to hold space for themselves, for their healing, and for their business?
Yeah. And for their clients too, because we work with a lot of investors and developers, but people who are also heart centered and people who want to make a bigger impact. So for anyone, and I think this is something that I really learned having gone through and going through grief, is to be a good listener and to be just holding space for them to listen through what they want, what they ultimately want, the why behind the why, and asking good questions and being curious and not trying to push my thoughts and my ideas and my solutions on them, but allowing them to share what their needs are, because everybody will tell you if you listen. And so we go through that deep dive with them in the beginning, discovery phase, if you will, to really be good listeners. And that's what we teach our team as well, to be good listeners and to try to pull it out of them even if they think they don't have a style, we go through an intensive process. And, some people are like, why do we have to spend so much? It's literally the foundations for everything else to come. If you don't put those foundations first, you can't build a house without the foundations. So it's literally what we do to help ensure that the project succeeds beyond their wildest dreams.
That is so important. As somebody who works with companies as well, one of the first things I do, which you do, is that discovery phase, what we call in the clinical arena assessment. I've been doing assessments for over 20 years with thousands of people now. And like you said, it's not going in and bulldozing and saying what they need. It's really drawing out from them during that assessment or discovery what they feel they want, they feel they need, how they can infuse what it is that they're looking for into their space to create safety for themselves. Just like you created safety for yourself as a child when your parents were going through that divorce and you went into that room and you started reconstructing and rearranging to have your own vision to create safety for yourself, which has evolved into what you've created today, Hadar Interiors. So this has been an incredible evolution with so much change. We change as human beings every single day, every minute. Our skin sloughs off. The weather changes and we have to adjust to that, whether it's bring an umbrella or wear a sweater or wear something lighter, layer clothes, whatever it is. Things change, and how we respond to that versus react is so significant. And the spaces that we create, whether they're in our house, in our office, make such a huge difference. We have covered so much today. My last question is, what's one powerful tip you'd share with someone who's navigating personal loss while trying to stay connected to their work or business experience?
Keep going. That's it. Keep going. Through loss, there's no answer. In my journey, I was constantly looking for an answer of why and how, and I've come to realize that there are no answers except to be strong, because sometimes we're not, and that's okay. But as long as we can put one foot in front of the other, or even pause for the time being, we can survive and we can face another day.
Thank you for joining me on the Core Women podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. You can follow Liat Siegel on LinkedIn and Instagram and at www.hadarinteriors.com.
Thank you for joining us on the Core Women podcast with Dr. Summer Watson. We're so glad you're here and would love to connect more with you. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Core Women, and on Twitter at Core Women 1. For more about Core Women and Dr. Watson, visit corewomen.com. Want more support and resources for amazing women like you? Great! Join Dr. Watson and Jen Fontanilla at the Life, Love, and Money Collective, a Core Women production that aids in understanding the key traits that might be getting in the way of living a life that you are absolutely passionate about. Connect with Summer and Jen and find out more at thelifeloveandmoney.com.